everyone. In this video, we will see the development of education under British rule. In this video, we will see that before the arrival of the British, the Indian education was religious in nature and Gurukul system prevailed, and with this, certain section of the society were not allowed to study, like women, and according to the Chaturvarna system, Shudras were prohibited to take education. But when the British arrived, they made some changes, though these changes were meant for their own benefit, as they wanted educated people in their administration. But this helped to improve the education system in India. So, in this video, we will see the stages of improvement under the East India Company, then the Crown, and under some national leaders. Under the company, for 60 years, there were minor and individual efforts towards education of Indians, and these efforts were the Calcutta Madrasa established by Warren Hastings in 1781 for educating the Muslims in Muslim laws and related subjects. Also, the Sanskrit College by Jonathan Duncan at Banaras in 1791 to study the Hindu law and philosophy. Fort William College was established by Wellesley in 1800 for the training of civil servants of the company, and the Calcutta Madrasa and the Sanskrit College were established to provide qualified Indians for British administration. For the first 60 years, the enlightened Indians and the missionaries started exerting pressure on the government to promote modern, secular and Western education to overcome the social evils of Indian society. So the first humble beginning of encouraging learning among Indians and promoting knowledge among them was done through Charter Act of 1813, and this act directed the company to sanction 1 lakh rupees annually for this purpose. Efforts of enlightened Indians such as Raja Ram Mohan Roy bore the fruit, and a grant was sanctioned for Calcutta College, which was set up in 1817. Also, according to the Act, the government set up 3 Sanskrit colleges at Calcutta, Delhi and Agra. So the important point is that we have to remember the provisions of this Act, because the provisions of this Act were asked in the prelims of 2018. Lord Macaulay's Minute of 1835 suggested the limited government resources were to be devoted for teaching of Western sciences and literature through the medium of English language alone. So after this suggestion, the government soon made English the medium of instruction in its schools and colleges, and opened a few English schools and colleges instead of a large number of elementary schools, thus neglecting mass education. Also, the British planned to educate a small section of upper and middle classes, and the educated class would act as interpreter between the government and the masses. This practice was known as downward filtration theory. Individual efforts like James Thomson, Lieutenant Governor of Northwestern Frontier Provinces, developed a comprehensive scheme for village education through the medium of vernacular languages. In these schools, the useful subjects of mensuration and agriculture sciences were taught. The purpose was to train personnel for the newly set up Revenue and Public Works Department. In 1854, Wood's Despatch, the Magna Carta of English education in India, was designed by Charles Wood under the reign of Lord Dalhousie. The document was the first comprehensive plan for the spread of education in India. The suggestion of the dispatch were that it asked the government of India to assume responsibility for education of the masses, and it systemized the hierarchy from vernacular primary schools in villages at the bottom and Anglo-vernacular high schools and an affiliated college at the district level. Also affiliating university in the presidency towns like Calcutta, Bombay and Madras. It also recommended English as the medium of instruction for higher studies and vernaculars at the school level, and laid the stress on female and vocational education, also on teachers' training. It laid down the education imparted in the government institution should be secular, and also recommended a system of granted aid to encourage private enterprises. Several developments were seen after the recommendation of Wood's Despatch of 1854, and in 1857 universities at Calcutta, Bombay and Madras were set up. Also, departments of education were set up in all the provinces, and Bethune School, founded by J.E.D. Bethune at Calcutta in 1849, was the first fruit of a powerful movement for the education of women. An agricultural institute at Pusa, Bihar, and engineering education institute at Roorkee were established. After the Crown took over, it set up a commission under Lord William Hunter in 1883 to review the progress of education in country since the Despatch of 1854. The Hunter Commission mostly confined its recommendation to primary and secondary education. The Commission recommended state special care is required for the extension and improvement of primary education and in vernacular language. It also recommended transfer of control of primary education to newly set up district and municipal boards. The Commission also recommended that secondary education should have two divisions, literary for university and vocational for commercial careers. It also drew attention to adequate facilities for female education. In the 20th century, the Indian political history saw a political unrest, and the official view was that under the private management the quality of education was deteriorating and educational institutes were acting as factories producing political revolutionaries. So in 1902, a Rayleigh Commission was set up by the government to go into the condition and prospects of the universities in India, and based on its recommendation, the Indian University Act of 1904 was passed. Now, as per this act, the universities were to give more attention to study and research, and the number of fellows at the universities were reduced and also nominated by the government. So, the government was to have powers and veto over universities. Also, the conditions were to be made stricter for the affiliation of private colleges, and 5 lakh rupees were to be sanctioned as per annum for 5 years for improvement of higher education and universities. In 1906, the progressive state of Baroda introduced compulsory primary education throughout its territories, and the nationalist leaders urged the British government to follow the same in the whole territory. In the year 1913, the government passed a resolution on education and refused to take responsibility for primary education of the masses, but urging the provincial authorities to make sure that primary education is compulsory in their provinces. In 1917, the Sadler University Commission was set up, and this commission was set up to study and report the problem of Calcutta University. But the recommendations were applied to all the universities, and it reviewed the entire field from school education to university education. It observed that the school course should cover 12 years and students should enter university after an intermediate stage of 3 years degree course. Also, there should be less rigidity in framing university regulation, and a university should function as centralized, unitary residential teaching autonomous body rather than as scattered affiliated colleges. It also emphasized on female education, applied scientific and technological education, teachers training should be extended, and in 1920 the government recommended Sadler report to the provincial governments. A Hartog Committee in 1929 was set up by the government to report on the development of education, and the main recommendations of this committee were: the emphasis should be given to primary education, but there should be no hasty expansion or compulsion in education, and only deserving students should go in for high school and intermediate stage, and the vocational studies were recommended for the average students. It also recommended for the improvement of standards of university education, and admission should be restricted to the university. The Sargent Plan of Education was worked out by the Central Advisory Board of Education in 1944, and it recommended pre-primary education for 3 to 6 years age group and free universal compulsory elementary education for 6 to 11 years age group and high school education for 11 to 17 years age group for selected children. Also, adequate technical, commercial and arts education. It also recommended abolition of intermediate courses, liquidation of adult illiteracy in 20 years, and also stressed on teacher training, physical education, education for physical and mentally handicapped. The development of vernacular education were in stages within India, and in the years 1835 to 38, Williams Adam report on vernacular education in Bengal and Bihar pointed out defects in the system. In the year 1843 to 53, there were individual efforts like James Jonathan experiments, including opening of one government school as model school in each tehsildar. In 1853, Lord Dalhousie expressed strong opinion in favor of vernacular education, and in 1854, Wood's Despatch made the following provisions for the vernacular education: improvement of standards, supervision by government agencies, and normal school to train teachers. After this, in the following phases of 1854 to 1871, the government paid some attention to secondary and vernacular education. And in 1882, the Hunter Commission held that the state should make special efforts for extension and improvement of vernacular education. In 1904, the education policy put special emphasis on vernacular education and increased grants for it. And in 1929, Hartog Committee presented a gloomy picture on primary education. And in 1937, these schools received encouragement from Congress ministries. So, to evaluate the British policy on education, there was an agitation in favor of modern education by the enlightened Indians, Christian missionaries, and humanitarian officials, and the need to ensure a cheap supply of educated Indians for the British business concerns. So, government hoped that educated Indians would help expand markets of British manufacturers in India, and the British thus wanted to use modern education to strengthen the foundation of their political authorities in India. The traditional system of Indian learning declined specially in 1844 when it was declared that the government wants employees with the knowledge of English language, and mass education was neglected, leading the widespread illiteracy. Since education was to be paid for, it became a monopoly of upper and richer classes and the city dwellers, and there was almost total neglect of women's education, and scientific and technical education was by and large neglected. Thank you for watching this video. I hope it was helpful for you. For more videos, please subscribe our channel.